Board games, board games, it's what we're talking about. Board games, board games, I'm not gonna shout. Here I have someone lovely for you. It is a person known as Matthew. Matthew Dunstan is their full name. They have made many a game. One of them was nominated for the Kenner Spiel des Jahres, and maybe Brett Gilbert was partially responsible for this. And it is always thanks to other people that collaborate and they help so well. And that is part of what Matthew Dunstan does. And maybe it gives Matthew Dunstan a buzz to be working in chemistry, but also designing, and not so much developing or publishing. Board games and Matthew is what we're talking about. Board games and Matthew, we're not going to shout. Board games and actually making money as a designer, it's what we're talking about. Board games and actually making money as a designer, I'm not going to shout. Hello.
Hello.
And hello, Sate. Apparently Matthew is slightly blurry, but I think that's just going to be your internet connection. I don't know if there's anything to help there, because all the different pictures are sent to like StreamYard, and then the StreamYard puts them out onto the thing. And hello, that's Anna, I believe, Anna Blackwell from Glasgow. Lovely to see you. Hopefully it's not too terrible. We will see if your internet improves. It's kind of deteriorated. I don't know if your partner suddenly started downloading a really big file or something.
I don't think so. Although she may even be looking at the stream, possibly, which maybe is. I can just 1 sec. I'll just say.
And morning, Rob. It is lovely to see you. And Sate says, well, I'll leave that. Have you got your headphones on? You can still hear. It says if you aren't plugged into the Ethernet, that helps, and if you are watching the stream in the background, closing it helps. And hello, Ella. We were just looking at you a couple of days ago because I was going through all the past streams from the past 100 and talking about what a lovely person you are and how lovely it was to have you on, and how we were going to have you on again, but then the Spiel des Jahres, Spiel Digital happened even. Not Spiel des Jahres. That's a completely different thing. Sorry about that. German people, and people who care about board games, which is probably, hopefully, everyone watching. I can't just get basic terms straight in my head. But yes, Ella would be lovely to have you again. And Alan in chat. And it says, now, show me the money. Board games. Okay. Let's start off by saying that this is the busy bath time board game bladder. Whether it is evening for you or nighttime or morning, you can always take a bath or you cannot take a bath. It is optional. But if you wish to take a bath, then this is why not take a bath now? It is entirely up to you. So for the next 100 episodes, this is going to be the busy bath time board game bladder, we've decided. And coming up today, we are talking about actually making money with Matthew Dunstan. And why did we choose this topic? Do you want to give a quick 30-second introduction before we go wildly off topic?
Sure. I think it's well. Firstly, thanks for having me on. Hi everyone. I think it's something that's not necessarily talked about a lot. We generally don't like, people don't like talking about money, but I think it's something that has been definitely on my mind a lot recently as I consider going full-time as a board game designer. And I think it's also something that we're both in different yet similar situations. So I think but that it's something that not necessarily a lot of people get a look into. So I think it could be interesting to chat about. And I haven't seen other people talking about it as much, so why not?
Yeah, for sure. And yeah, we say, oh, say it's, I mean, Ella, yeah, it's all good. Like, I'm so sorry, and I hope that your son is generally okay. And yeah, like, if you ever want to come on again, like, it would be lovely to have you on. Like, let's talk about, you know, the Dice Tower or something. I don't know. We could talk about all sorts of things. And people are excited about you being less blurry. And yeah, don't give your guests ideas. They might leave the stream to go bathe. Which is, and hello, Alex. And hello, Michael. It is lovely to see you all. It is amazing. And so let's get stuck into something completely different. Brilliant thing, what's a little thing which is brilliant?
Oh, that's my cue. For me, it is brewing tea and doing puzzles, which is part of my, well, if I can, part of my regular morning routine. So sometime mid-morning, I'll brew myself a cup of hopefully Earl Grey tea or black tea of some sort, have a biscuit, and sit down with a kind of a numerical logic puzzle. So like Sudoku, but there are lots of different variations out there, which I enjoy.
Do you like to do a different style of puzzle, like have a different set of rules to that puzzle every single day? Or do you like to...
I definitely like variety. Yeah, there's I don't know, there's probably like 20 or 30 main styles of puzzles that come up a lot, and you can find on the internet, or they have like a World Puzzle Grand Prix thing where they release a certain number of puzzles every year. So I tend to go back through those and print them off and do them.
I know that in the comments we've got Alex who does those 16 grids of 4x4 squares, and then you need to work out which 4 groups of 4 things are related, if you know what I mean. Have you seen those?
Yeah, there's lots of, there's ones where you have like these 2x2 tiles that you need to fit into some larger grid, and there's some rules about that. There's a few famous ones. One's called Battleships. It's kind of based roughly on the Battleships board game, but it's where you have to place the battleships on a grid subject to some clues, and you don't know where they are. There's another one called Star Battles, which is quite popular, which is basically putting a few stars into different parts of a grid. I mean, they're all, they break down roughly into sort of like 4 categories. One is like filling in, shading squares black or white, dividing up space into different shapes, putting numbers in certain things. Yeah, so I mean, none of them, I guess, are so different ultimately, but each of them has little rules, little tricks that you learn, and having that variety is very nice.
Because, I mean, I'm just thinking that the things that Alex is working on are very much general knowledge and word-based, but it sounds like you are far more enjoying the almost, let's say, pure maths, pure logic that doesn't require any logic or information from outside of the game to complete.
You're right. Yeah, no, that's a fair assessment. Yeah, so I the ones I like just have 1 or 2 rules which are specific for that puzzle, but you know the rules, and yeah, it doesn't rely on any general knowledge or any word things. That being said, there are a lot of quite popular word. There was a very, I'm going to forget the name, but there was a very popular American magazine, I think, called World of Puzzles, which I think is still going. Maybe it's only digital now. And it was roughly split. Half of it was more of these logic puzzles. Half of it were very like word-based and some general knowledge kind of puzzles.
And for Alan in chat, yes, Alex's puzzles are like that old Only Connect thing. And Alex, feel free to share a link.
Yeah, and if Alex is working and stuff, I'd love to see what he's
Sate also prefers the perfect information systems. My general knowledge is... And hello, Nicholas. It is lovely to see you. So I know that Brett Gill, I got this one that's kind of happened to sit next to me. I honestly, since I left Aircon, I played through a bunch of the puzzles. It did give me a good few hours of entertainment. And then I got halfway through, and then I've never actually opened it again, is the truth. Yeah. But I don't feel unhappy that I bought it. It was like still a really lovely thing. I was like, okay, we're entering lockdown straight after aircon, and let's buy this. Let's have something that I can enjoy on my own. I know that Brett Gilbert has made those sorts of things.
Yeah, I could even show one or two. Hold on.
And I was going to ask if you had ever thought of making any puzzles yourself, Matthew.
Yeah, no, we had thought about working on some together at some point. I've got, well, one. This is from Brett. And this came out from Moses Verlag just last year, I think. And it's actually quite an old design of his, where I think it's only available in German, that you have these sort of clear perspex domino pieces with lines on them, like this, with different patterns. And then you just get a book, or sorry, you don't get a book. You get a number of these sheets, and in every white space you have to put one of the dominoes. And the point is that you have to make essentially a continuous, loop.
Oh yeah, so that's I get it.
So I mean, I'm not going to be able to probably do it very well on. But like something like that is probably a good, that kind of works, for example. And then,
at the top, you'd want something that's connected all four of those. So you'd actually want those exact 3 lines on the other domino.
Yeah, exactly. So that's the kind of the basic, and you're trying to, I'm not going to be able to do it from one side or the other. And basically they get, in fact, even in these early puzzles, they tell you specifically which dominoes you need. So I need number 2 and I need number 5. Whereas, as they get harder and harder, they start, basically the harder ones, you need all the dominoes. And, because you have a lot more choice about where to put things or even what the orientation is, then they get harder and harder. So, so that's, and Moses Verlag has done, they've got a series of these games they've started doing again. And the only other one I sort of brought out, which Brett also put me onto, it's not his game, but this is an old thing called Black.
Oh, yes. Oh my gosh. I've not played this one, but I've read about it so much. I would really love to give it a go.
Yeah, so Brett had a copy. I hadn't heard of it at all. Growing up in Australia, we didn't really see these. It's published in England, mainly.
I've only heard about it on the internet.
Yeah, it's hard. Basically, it's based on this idea of like a light box. So you put these elements, which are metal, actually really nice metal balls, on some part of a grid, and then so that's one person sets the puzzle, which is just some configuration of these balls, and then the other person, a little bit like Mastermind, they take turns sort of making a guess, but it's not really a guess. They're doing an experiment, and the idea is they take one of these colored pawns, which is to represent shining a light of that color into the box in that direction. And you put it somewhere on the edge of the grid. And then the other person who knows where the things are, sorry, I should say also that while you're playing, the metal balls are not on the grid. Like the other person's written down where they are, and the person who knows the puzzle will then put the matching colored pawn somewhere else on the edge. And that's the idea that, one of the basic rules about these elements, there's like a few basic rules about how light interacts when it comes near one of these elements. Like, for example, like it can reflect, as Rob's saying, it can essentially bounce off at right angles, and it'll come out another side, and then that will be where the other pawn is put. So basically, you're getting information as you put these different, as you make experiments, and the object.
And so it's basically about working out, based on the inputs and outputs, what is going on in this sealed
black box.
Titular black box. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. You have to be able to guess, where all the elements are, in as few moves as possible, a bit like Mastermind, essentially.
It does feel like it has that same shortcoming as Mastermind, though, that one person is essentially not really playing the game, which is a thing, to be fair, with Master Word. Like, this is not to review. I really enjoyed playing it with, look, I played it with Eric Yurko. I should stop saying people's names. I'm going any any issues, I'm just going to blame on drugs and tooth pain. But look, it has that same issue where someone's not really playing the game. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, no, exactly. I mean, in the end, they make better.
Thank you, Ian.
Solo experiences essentially, and that's why actually I think even the black box game has a logic puzzle equivalent that you can do as like a printed puzzle in a newspaper or something. So yeah, it's there's a downside certainly.
So I guess let's go to recent highlights, living life and seeing the sights. Recent highlights, playing games and other delights. Recent highlights. So in the chat, Sate is asking about my teeth. So yeah, basically I went to the dentist yesterday. I thought that they were going to, I actually thought that it was me getting an emergency appointment with a normal dentist because it was in a bad state. But what I found out was that it was just an emergency dentist. And then I had to choose whether to extract the tooth or do some drilling and injections and make it kind of okay for a while and then get fixed at a later point at a normal dentist. And I'm not going to lie, I did find the choice of extraction or not to be quite overwhelming. And it's not my wisdom tooth, it's the one next to the wisdom tooth. And so it still feels like, oh, that's a big chunk of eating surface to lose. Do you know what I mean? And so, yeah, then I said, okay, please do the thing where you try to save it. And then they gave me the first injection. Then after the first injection, I started to feel really lightheaded. It might have been psychosomatic. It might have been that I was really anxious about it. I mean, honestly, this is not a highlight, but like at least I went there. And I mean, I guess it's a highlight in so much as it is a standout moment, if you know what I mean. But yeah, so basically I went there, they gave me an injection. My mouth was numb for a while, but they said, look, I had a bit of a panic attack, and then they said, we can't do this, but we'll refer you to someone who does the mouthpiece and gas treatment. And yeah, even talking about it, like I am feeling a bit more stressed about it, which suggests that, yeah, possibly it was like a bit of an emotional, is psychosomatic the correct word, reaction?
Yeah, I mean, you know, you some you know, mental thingies have kind of had an impact on your physical health, you know. But
yeah, anyway, I just finished my last antibiotic this morning. We'll see how we get on. But I have had the good news that it's definite that the doctor said it's not likely to spread to another tooth, so that's good. So the infection isn't in a place where it's likely to do any actual damage beyond the damage to that one tooth. So other than the immense pain that might start again, you know, because right now it's, you know, there's not lots of pain, you know. Yeah. Apparently there's no long-term damage, so that's, you know, good to know. So yeah, that is a highlight, that there's no long-term damage. And hello, J Folsgard. I've not got much else to speak of. Oh yeah, Chris came over. We did a bit of chatting and a bit of work on Chris sets up next week's streams and stuff. And but what did you get up to, Matthew?
I mean, we're in lockdown here in Prague, so still mostly inside. Weather's been quite nice, so I've been able to walk around a lot, which I would say is actually doesn't sound like much of a highlight. But after we came off about what it felt like 2 or 3 weeks of just overcast days after overcast days, having some sunshine and getting out and walking in the park a bit was very, very welcome. I find the darkness, I'm being Australian, I'm not so used to it getting so bad in winters in terms of darkness. So it really affects me, you know, more than probably someone who's maybe a bit more used to it. So that's always a nice thing to get some sunshine. And I actually, a few weeks ago, it was my birthday, and my fiance surprised me with a trip to some tiny houses actually outside of Prague.
How tiny?
Sorry?
How tiny?
Fairly tiny, kind of the size. Well, one was a tree house actually. It was in a, you know, amongst the boughs of a tree. I'm not very good with you know, square meterage, but you know, it was about a hotel room sized kind of, you know, it's like this. And then we went to it. This property had several of them, so we had one night in the treehouse and one night in a rather modern tiny house that was only built just this year. It looks a bit like a shipping container. It's smaller than a shipping container, probably half a shipping container, I would say. And that was, yeah, that was really cool. We're very into tiny houses at the moment, and that kind of movement. So my younger brother was looking at building one back in Australia for a while, and we're interested in it as well. So it was really nice to experience. Yeah.
That sounds lovely. So kind of having a sleepover in this tiny house just as a different sort of experience.
Yeah, and you get out in the nature. It was in a really nice forested area, you know, so lots of really nice walks, and you felt very much away from the city, which is really nice, and I enjoy it a lot. So, and even just seeing all the different like gadgets and how people use space. There's lots of interesting architectural sort of tricks and tips and things, and you know, composting toilets, and there was even a sauna actually in one of them. So I mean, this was a pretty upmarket tiny house. I'm not sure, you know, it's not necessary. I wouldn't build a sauna in my own tiny house, which is something I'm also personally not very used to. Again, being Australian, we don't do sauna really. So for me,
because
you know,
it's already hot enough outside. Well,
yeah, and we're not looking to get, you know, to get hotter, you know, and also like humidity. I mean, thankfully in Australia generally it's not very humid unless you get really in the very northern part of the country. So yeah, that kind of humidity I'm also not used to, I guess, which is of course the whole point of sauna. But my friend Therese is obviously much more used to it being Czech and European, so it's a much more commonplace thing here. So it was just funny, differing kind of expectations and experiences.
And it says they lived in a Suzuki bus once for a few years, and then moved up into Volkswagen bus. So roomy. Yeah,
it's amazing. I mean, it's
so relative.
Yeah, exactly. And how this, I mean, there's some really great YouTube channels that you can kind of look and see what people have done all around the world, and really on a pretty wide range of scales. You know, there are people who really, it's not much more than a car, or, you know, like a really micro kind of apartment or something like that, up to people who have, you know, several shipping containers, you know, which is actually reasonably large space. Yeah, it's interesting. And I just love all these sort of little architectural, like the ways of making furniture into different things. You know, you have tables folding out of walls, and you know, beds, putting stuff under beds, and all sorts of things is always a lot of fun.
No, that sounds super lovely.
Yeah, it was really nice.
If anyone has any more questions about tiny little houses, or indeed chemistry, or anything else, but I will warn you, if you ask about what the food was like at the Spiel des Jahres ceremony, Matthew can't remember.
Oh, yeah, I said that somewhere else. Did I say that?
Yeah, I asked you, and then you basically said that you couldn't really remember much about the food because you were too distracted by everything else going on, like all the celebrations and the talks and the media people there.
It was a very nice buffet, I remember, you know, in a hotel, but it was not, I guess the other point is there wasn't anything particularly, you know, standing out about it, which is probably why I also don't remember it.
So it was like good quality.
No. There should be no question. It was very good quality, very nice, but nothing sort of like, well, which is good, because if it was terrible, I definitely would have remembered it, I guess. So it was very nice. I must say I've probably been quite spoilt in terms of dining experiences, probably from my time at Cambridge colleges. I would say have probably had unusual amount of fine dining experiences for you know, my time on Earth, I guess.
Well, you've already mentioned you're in Prague. I like to start off by saying, yes, I am based in London. Not everyone is. So where exactly are you, and what time is it?
Sure. So I'm in Prague, Czech Republic, or Czechia, as it's supposed to be called now, but I don't like that word very much. And it is almost 11:30, so we're 1 hour ahead of UK time. And so I've been living for a long time. I've actually lived between Prague and the UK. I still have a job in Cambridge. So I've been with my fiance for over 10 years now, and I would travel between the two for a long time. But since lockdown in March, actually just before I was supposed to be going to Aircon, And I heard on the train that they were closing the borders to the Czech Republic, and I hopped on a plane instead of going to Aircon, basically. And I've been here ever since.
And just to clarify, in case I said the wrong words, I wasn't talking about the Spiel, I was talking about the Spiel des Jahres ceremony, because referring to the time when Matthew's co-design Elysium was nominated for the Kenner Spiel des Jahres, and Matthew got to go to the ceremony, which very few people will get to go to.
It was very nice.
So, I would like to ask you, in the absence, everyone feel free to put forward your questions. I don't have any pre-written today, but I would like to ask you, how did you get into science? Have you already been fascinated by the way that things work?
Yeah, I think I was interested. I probably was interested in mathematics first, I would say. I remember a very old US television series called Square One, which was probably broadcast, I think, either the late 80s or the early 90s. And it was this amazing show, yeah, aimed at, I guess, probably primary age school children, or maybe even a little bit younger, like, I don't know, 6, 7, or 8 year olds, something like that. And they had lots of little segments, which sometimes were like kind of like game shows where they would have real children come in and kind of compete. They had a Dragnet parody show called MathNet, where there were mathematicians solving crimes, and it had like the Dragnet theme music and everything. And over 5 episodes, they'd have, you know, it was like a serial over five episodes and things like that. And it was, yeah, I've got someone loves math. Well, yeah, it's actually, and when you look back on it, actually, they really, the level of mathematics they included in the show was actually quite, not at like a super high level, but it was very appropriate. And I think it was just presented in a really nice way. And actually some of the game show parts were actually quite good games, actually. So that's probably one of the things that got me really interested in, or that's at least a very early memory of being very interested in mathematics. And then, yeah, I guess all through schooling, my primary school and high school, I always gravitated towards maths and science subjects. My father's a maths teacher. My mother was a science teacher. So it's probably not a complete surprise that I turned out liking science. And I guess I felt I had good role models, like my parents. My cousin is now a professor at Oxford University in chemistry. He sort of is about 8 years older than me, but we ended up having a similar path. He went to undergraduate in Sydney Uni. I did the same. He did a PhD in Cambridge. I did the same. So yeah, I think it was part of role models, and I just loved, that was the way my head worked. That kind of logical way of thinking, and the scientific method, and various parts that I was always really interested in. I'm still very interested in science. I mean, obviously I work as a researcher at the University of Cambridge. I work in renewable energy technologies, batteries, carbon capture, things like that. I'm getting more and more into machine learning and ways to use that in research. I'm also interested in combining games and research together. I've done some pop-up escape rooms around the periodic table, and made a board game about the synchrotron in the UK, and interested in kind of using games and science as outreach and things like that. So yeah, I'm not going to stop being interested in it for a while, I think.
So, like, then you got into game design, and do you think, what was the first game that you remember playing?
I remember playing. It probably would have been a traditional card game. My grandmother really liked euchre, which is sort of I'm not sure if people know it, but it's a sort of a trick-taking game, basically. And we would play it 2 players, just me and her. I remember that. We probably played some simple. I'm sure we tried Monopoly and things like that when we were kids. And one of my aunts taught me chess when I was probably about 6, I think. So those are some really early experiences. I really enjoyed chess. I had a little portable. She gave me a little portable chess set that I would challenge my teachers when I was in first grade or something during lunchtime to play chess with me. There was 1 or 2 that would. Yeah, it's not surprising that I've ended up as a game designer. I was obviously a massive nerd from a very young age. But Yeah, and like traditional card games. So I think amongst my family, that's something we played a lot. Yes, that's how. Well, at least I think that's how you pronounce euchre. That's how we've always pronounced it. And I think there's always it's one of these games that's different all around the world. I think
it's his French as well.
Yeah,
but I mean, this is not a. We do not claim to be experts in all the traditional cards games for the, but what we can say is like, yeah, I mean, getting to you, I mean, did you ever have aspirations of turning this into a profession?
No, certainly not at the start. I mean, when I started making games, it was before I was about to start my PhD, so that for me, science was still very much the profession I was going towards. I had a PhD ahead of me, which was going to be at least 3 or 4 years. And I enjoyed games. From that kind of very traditional gaming start, I got into sort of more hobby games later on, and around university and things like this. And no, for me, it was a sort of a mental challenge almost, or like a mental curiosity for me that I liked games. I've always liked exploring my hobbies in a slightly different way, or getting behind the curtain. So, I mean, one other example is I played a lot of sport as a kid, but what I ended up doing a lot more was refereeing various sports. So I was a state referee for field hockey. I did a lot for touch football. I did some cricket umpiring. I was a lines person at the Australian Open, so they're the people who call the lines for the Australian Open. So I think I'm always driven with my hobbies to do something, a bit behind the curtain. And I think game design is probably a similar kind of idea, but for playing games. So yeah, and I think it's interesting that we're talking about making money and professionalism. I was reflecting on it a little bit. Is that it's hard? It's a hard thing to target as a goal, I think. There are a lot of we were chatting a little bit before the stream, and maybe we'll get onto this a little bit later. But there's a lot of luck that goes into even being in a position to consider it to be a profession. Now, I think it's not all luck there, and I think there are things you can definitely learn, and you can kind of give yourself the best chance to be lucky, if that would be. And there's certainly, but. I was lucky that I had I was a PhD student and then a scientist after. I had a career or work that was flexible enough that meant I could keep doing this game designing stuff. I had enough time to do it. Financially, I didn't have too many responsibilities, and I had enough money from the other job that I never had to design games thinking I had to make money from them. And all that time means you can build up the craft and the experience about designing games, and then you do get to a point, if you can stick with it for long enough, that you get in a point to be able to consider it to be a profession, which is kind of where we're at with this discussion now. But yeah, it shouldn't forget, that I've been this is a 10-year process essentially. I pretty much started designing games 10 years ago. So there are things you can do, I think, to make that process quicker, but you can't make it infinitely small either. I think there's just amount of time you need to kind of get established, I think. Bez, I think, are you still?
I see we've just been raided, so a quick shout out to Obscure Kuro. Thank you very much for joining us. We are right now talking with Matthew Dunstan. We're just finishing off the questionably quick questions, so in a minute or two, I mean, we have ventured dangerously close to the topic, and
that was my fault. That was my fault. Sorry.
No, I mean, it's lovely. I actually like it when the questionably quick questions actually lead into the topic, and I was slightly pushing towards that myself, but if people would like to hear any silliness, like the typical, and yes, please ask. Matthew is an amazing designer, as you can see in the banners, with over 25 published games. And we are both in a position where we are able to make some sort of regular income. And what we're talking about today is how you can actually make money by designing games, not by publishing, not by developing, but by designing those games. And so, yes, if you have any comments, then please ask.
We can just talk about Eurovision if you want, you know, just to go off on a tangent. That's what I like in the conversation.
Well, hello, Boss Hog Boston, and hello, Obscure Curio. Thank you so much for the raid.
Love the name. Obscure Curio. It's great name.
And Xate asks, well, I know what question Xate wants to ask. Would you rather have a duck-sized meeple or a meeple-sized duck? So for those who don't know, a meeple is about this big, so it's a piece used in many board games. And would you rather have a giant sculpture version or a tiny, teeny, tiny little duck?
I think I would probably prefer a duck-sized meeple. I'm not a big pet person generally, so I think.
Okay, I can, and I don't know if Alex is actually angling for me to just say, okay, we'll take a 30-second break for Matthew Dunstan to do a self-portrait. That seems very unkind. I mean, I don't know how comfortable you would be with that.
It's going to be very, very, very bad. That is not in my skill set at all. Any sort of it's not. I can't even do abstract. You know, like it will just. I don't know. It will just look like a scribble or something. So I'm not sure if it's going to add too much to the stream, I'm afraid.
Yeah. Would you basically just how would you approach it? Would you be thinking, okay, let's do a stick figure, let's do like a basic smiley face, or would you actually try to do something that looks like you?
I think I probably would go stick figure, because if I tried to make it look like me, it would cross into that uncanny valley of, you know, the more effort I put into it, just the more creepy it would look. Whereas if I start up being, it's just going to be abstract, you're not going to offend anybody. It's not going to be, you know, it's not going to resemble anything, but at least it's not going to be a negative thing either. So,
I mean, playing it safe. I'm disappointed in you, Matthew.
I'm sorry. I'm a bit. Yeah, I do play it safe, maybe a bit too much. Yeah.
So Michael asks, who should have won this year's Eurovision?
That is a great question. That is, I've just been, Mike, I've been listening to I regularly listen to the Eurovision songs on Spotify. I think Russia probably should have won. I'm not sure. Are you much of a Eurovision fan, Bez?
I have not listened to any of them.
Oh, okay. Have you've never watched the show? Nothing like that?
I watched it a couple of times. Okay. Maybe parts of it, not the entire thing. Sat down and made an event of it, but for sure, one time I was, watched a good chunk of it. So I was okay, so this is what it's all about. Okay, yeah. I can see how, like the Super Bowl, if you make like a big event of it, I wouldn't really want to watch a football match on my own. But like for sure, like even the World Cup, the only reason that I might watch that, frankly, is because of the people around me. And sure, if England is playing against Russia, then as, a British person, I'm going to support England. If it's England versus Scotland, I'm obviously going to support Scotland. But it's like you watch it with people, and whilst you might care a little bit about it, it's more about the drama, about the unfurling story. But let's be honest, with sports, the story is kind of abstract enough that what really matters is the people around it who amplify that.
No, I think
it feels like it's the same thing for Eurovision.
Yeah, you hit it right on the head for me. It's just this shared, extremely positive sort of party-like experience. That it's not even just the actual night. It's the weeks leading up to it. It's exactly talking about like who should have won, or which song do you like, or trading Twitter jokes during the evening, which Michael Fox is amazing at. I definitely follow him on Twitter just for the night of Eurovision alone. For me, I think it's the thing that is so genuinely positive that I think really rarely happens that much in the things we consume or even the things we talk about. It's this thing that it brings people together, and even when you make fun of Eurovision, it's done in a way that there's a certain amount of love and affection for it, and that kind of positivity every year, it's just an amazing thing.
And Alex says a superb owl would be more entertaining than the Super Bowl.
somebody should have it. That sounds like a good username. Just put it all in lower cases and see what people assume it is, or something like that.
I mean, one of them has entered the public consciousness a lot more.
That is true, but that's why it's fun, because you're doing something unexpected. Everyone thinks that you're doing the thing that is entered the public consciousness.
So let's get let me quickly let's not linger on this too much. What's been a typical day like for you recently? I mean, you mentioned that Prague in the Czechia it is now locked down again. How are things?
Yeah, I mean, it's not too bad, but yeah, the day is getting up basically indoors most of the day. Realistically, we're trying to be responsible and not go out too much, but we try and exercise in the morning, which we're trying to do these sort of 10-minute YouTube workouts. I only do 10 minutes. My Teresi can manage to do 3 or 4 of them. So I go and have a shower or things, and then yeah, I'm basically working at my computer for most of the day. Realistically, a mixture of mostly my research job and then some game things, answering emails, working on a game sometimes, which is often also on the computer now because you're preparing prototypes to be digital. But we play games together. Usually each day we'll try and play at least one actual game, you know, in the physical world. So, you know, we like playing Point Salad a lot, which is sort of really quick, you know, like 10, 15 minutes you can have over breakfast or something like that. We'll cook some dinner, you know, watch something on Netflix probably in the evening. But yeah, it's a fairly, you know, sedentary kind of experience, I guess. But that being said, I'm still quite thankful. We moved into a new apartment where we're renting an apartment, but we moved into a new rental before this in November last year. So we've been here now a year, but it's much more suited to having 2 people living here all the time than our old apartment. I have like a little mezzanine. It's kind of a loft apartment, but it has a mezzanine where I can have a bit of an office, whereas where I am. And you know, Teresi has a different point that she can sort of work in. So it worked out. It worked out really well, and it's very comfortable. I have all my games here finally, and I have IKEA Kallax shelves, you know, finally, which is, you know, a badge of achievement in the board game community, I guess.
Yeah, those perfect squares that fits board games in so brilliantly. And it does sound like a pleasant existence, but I understand why, you know, getting out the other day was a recent highlight for you. And for me as well, actually being like, oh, I'm a bit tired from these drugs and like prescription drugs, to make that clear, but going over and just posting something that someone had ordered from Amazon, which I still have weird feelings about because I do deliberately charge £8 more on Amazon just so that I make a similar amount of money, whether it's on Amazon or on my own shop. And people still occasionally buy on Amazon because they just search there. And fair if that's what you want to do. Clearly, I mean, let that be a lesson to you. Don't always be buying on Amazon. It's not always the cheapest. Do like a Google search, and yeah.
I think that's a very, very wise part to say. But yeah, it's those moments to get out, and it's actually also the reason I started streaming. I know maybe it's somewhat similar to you.
That sounds. No, I would not do that.
That's not a way to encourage a customer base, you know, a loyal customer base, is it? You know, just to kind of give them.
I included my business card, so hopefully they've got my website for next time.
Yeah, you could have a little flyer. Well, I mean, obviously people already do that, right? People put little flyers in games about the other things they could have bought, but yeah, but for me, and streaming became another thing that I've started doing, which was trying to break out of the 4 walls that you're living in, and just, you know, be chatting to other people, which I've sort of really enjoyed as well.
Yeah, like you've started that. I think you mentioned that it was inspired by me somewhat, and for me it was totally just let's try and chat to more people. Like today, you know, I get to see you. It's like, okay, it's Matthew Dunstan time, and you know, we could say, oh, we'll chat for a couple of hours, but for sure having an audience, and maybe not everyone feels comfortable coming on camera, but some people might also want to chat, and having a thing where we're like, okay, it feels a bit more meaningful, it feels a bit more less like if I were to say, hey, Matthew, do you want to just chat for 2 hours and just chat about anything, just as a friend for a couple of hours? I mean, I'm not saying you would say no, but it
putting me on the spot,
yeah, like I think that would be a weirder thing. Do you know what I mean? I don't know why.
Yeah, I mean, some people work on structure. Structure helps social interaction. It's why board games in some ways help social interactions, right? We're all gathering around this sort of structured experience, and I think streams are somewhat similar to that. And I like the element of chat and that community. I don't think I kind of anticipated it. It was something completely new for me. But having seeing the regular faces and usernames in chat and chatting, it's a different type of socializing, but it feels really like a nice kind of community that you're kind of getting to hang out with. So yeah, no, I really enjoyed it, and yeah, it was definitely inspired by your example, Bez. I think you just showed that you could do it. You could just decide to do it. So
yeah, even though Alex, as one of the regulars in chats, Alex and like all the moderators, even though Chris and Jason don't come on very often, but for sure, Alex, Satan, and like everyone who like I can actually see all the names, and I see so many people that I recognize, and like there's, I don't want to start naming people because then it feels like, okay, then there's all the other people you didn't name. Do you know what I mean? But it's like the fact that Obscure Curio raided us, and like there's that whole community, and that recently I've been raiding a lot of musicians. And it's like, okay, after the stream, maybe we go and we listen to some music together, and it's kind of oh, sorry, I'm laughing at Sate. No, I don't return to this channel ever. See you all tomorrow, right? And then yeah, but yeah, like seeing all these lovely people, and like people who sometimes raid, and like sometimes you raid other people, and like it's not like, look, you can't watch everything. That's the thing. And for sure, at some time, I want to do a proper 2-hour stream where we just talk about streaming. And because there's a weird social dynamic, do you know what I mean? Where in some sense, the person on camera has all the power, because if I wanted to flash up something pornographic, if I wanted to shock you with some, for sure, it would hurt me professionally, but, I could do that. And maybe this whole thing is a scam, and maybe I'm just waiting until I get 1,000 people watching. And as soon as I get 1,000 people watching, boom, I'm going to show you naked pictures.
I guess ultimately there's probably a more efficient way to scam people than to stream for, hundreds of hours for, small increments. I think the thing is that it's by its very nature, you have to put so much. You can't be doing this to scam people. And I think the communities that grow out of these channels, they reflect the channel first, the host themselves. So I think your community reflects you, and then that kind of welcoming, kind of community reflects your own qualities. So. I was trying to make it a nice and heartfelt statement, but you're just all about the.
No, it is. I agree that everyone here is lovely, and oh, stop it, you people! Oh, you're making me laugh too much. So, yeah, you. Oh, sorry, just yogi is cool, but do you want to see someone folding themselves into a pretzel without clothes? Yeah, it's basically going to be like the way that I yeah. Oh man,
that's the new adult line of yogi there. Yeah, there you go. This,
okay, okay, I'm going to draw a line under this, please. But oh my gosh. But let's move on to the main topic. Let's kind of just move on. Feel free to comment. Ask now. Let's get a bit more relevant. Ask about making money as a designer, which is what we're talking about. Feel free to follow if you do that stuff. Lots of love. And I don't have one of those computers that tells me when people are following. I kind of feel like I should one of those things, because those are pretty cool. And then you can say, oh, thanks for the follow again. This is something that we'll be talking about on the show about streams. Maybe have Michael on, because apparently Dave learnt that thing called Streamlabs. Or
yeah, he was talking about it yesterday, and I also need to learn about it.
And Runa's doing quite well. I think Runa's got this little computer, and like you can have bots and stuff, which I've not quite accessed, but there's these song requests where I was thinking, oh, if you could do a song request and use it for games in some way, like what if you got the audience to do the request for your move? It would be kind of like a programming game, if you know what I mean.
Well,
so the
like
audience
Twitch plays Pokemon. They've already done it. Do you know Twitch plays Pokemon?
No.
So there was a Twitch channel which basically you would type in the comments like which button you wanted to press, and they were streaming a game of Pokemon, and essentially it would take some average of all the moves, or it would try to run through them in order. And so the comments were running but of course there was always this lag. So, someone would say up, but then the other person would say down, and it would just keep canceling it out. And it took them like a year to get through the whole game, like doing this kind of like almost like Brownian motion sort of idea. So yeah, check it out. Twitch plays Pokemon, and I think there's probably been a few other things they've done.
And yes, Michael, you are allowed to be ridiculous and be self-aggrandizing, and call yourself the king of Streamlabs. And yes, but anyway, let's get to the main topic, which is, I just realized that for those who don't know this stream, I hope that it's not just about actually making money no matter what your profession. If you're just wanting to make money, as a chef or as a writer, that's a wee bit out with the scope of this show. And this is where I lose, like, basically everyone.
You say the viewership numbers just go to 0 or something.
But this is about making money as a board game designer, because you are making money and you're continuing to make money as a scientist for sorry, which university?
University of Cambridge.
Thank you very much.
Right.
Yes, and so, but you do have this income stream from royalties. That's basically how it works, right? You can make money as from royalties that you sell your thing, or you can even sometimes do design for hire, which might be a thing with IPs. Or if someone says, hey, I want you to work on this game, although freelancing and work for hire is more prevalent with development. So maybe it's time to do some definitions and to say, like, what are we talking about? Like, what is development? What is design? Where would we draw the line? And what do we mean by making money as a designer?
Yeah, I think, so the first thing is to try and say what is design as opposed to development. So I would consider design as the process of coming up with an original game idea and playtesting and iterating that to a point where it can be sold to a publisher. It also means that it can be played. Obviously, it needs to be a playable game and it works. In most of the cases, it's to get, design a game to a point where it can then be published. Now, of course, after that point, other people get involved. So there's a publisher who will get involved, and there's all the things around publishing. That publisher, you might yourself be publishing the game, which case you're self-publishing. That's a whole different skill set. But in the middle there's also development, which is, I would say, taking a game that already exists, that was already designed, even by yourself, but usually by somebody else, and improving upon that game and developing it to a set of criteria. Usually this is going to be to make it fit a particular market or a particular publisher, particular price point, think about product concerns. There are a lot of other things that you worry about in development. There's a bit of a blurry line because obviously development does involve improving the game and changing the design. And you do that when you design. You obviously change the game as you're designing. So there's not a clean point, but in terms of when we think about making money, it's a lot easier, because I would say as a designer, yes, you design a game and then you license it to a publisher. And the most common way is you license to a publisher and you will receive income in the form of royalties. And that's a percentage of each game that publisher sells. The percentage of the money that this publisher makes when they sell the game. For a developer, it's very different. Often it's much more of a contract-based system. So, you'd be contracted by a publisher, you'd be paid a set amount to work on this project and to get it to a point. Sometimes you might get paid royalties. That's not completely unknown, that you might get a royalty on the game, much like the designer does, usually a smaller royalty. But yeah, so when we're talking about making money, yeah, it's mainly making games, sell to publishers that will eventually make you royalties, which are income. And I'd say that's the majority of my experience, and for most game designers, that's the same. And as you noted,
yes,
there is the case that you sometimes have design for hire, which is much more like contract work, which you will agree upon a set fee. And then when you design the game, then the rights will revert to the publisher, essentially. You're essentially selling the game completely to that publisher in return for this flat fee. Although I guess in the greater scheme of things, it's still income for a design, but it does function quite differently. And I think that's one of the things we probably will talk about a bit, that the difference, because it's a royalty-based income stream, it's a passive income stream, which means that you can continue to get money without necessarily doing more work. And in some ways, being a professional game designer is being cognizant of that and realizing maybe how to make the most of that, I guess, which has its advantages and disadvantages.
And yeah, for sure, there's I've done a tiny bit of work for hire for Peter Hazelwood. It didn't actually come to anything. It was actually design rather than development, which is, I've done actually, now I think about it, this is a little bit out with the board game scope, but Sarah Jury invited me to join for King's College London, where we were making a LARP about gender identity. And I think that within the art space, that's something that's a lot more common, where you give some sort of grant and it's like, hey, this is the broad scope of what I'm planning to make. It's just an idea. There's not even any design. And they're like, okay, you know what? Based on your previous work, we are going to give you, we're going to commit to actually paying you thousands of pounds for several months of work. And that is actually a really interesting thing, because there's an enormous amount of trust there. Whereas obviously royalty scheme, it's okay, you show us this game, we can see that it's good, we can see that we're going to make money off it. If we don't make money, well, you don't get any money either, except for the advance. But the advance, okay, depends on the things. And I do want to say a quick hello to Taylor in chat. Thank you very much for joining us. And hello, Prey. I hope that you're doing okay.
I was going to just say, Bez, I think you touch on an important point with, and I also have been involved now with a few, because I'm working on games that have an educational side. I have been involved in these sort of grant processes from the EU, and interesting enough, it's much more similar to my actual work as a scientist, because a lot of science is done by getting a grant that will pay people's salaries, essentially. And that is actually another way that is, you make a proposal about the work you're going to do. And if it's successful, then you essentially get funded, and that gives you some income. And interestingly enough, it's not always necessarily to make a set product. You promise that you're going to do something, and you certainly have to document what you do normally, and you have to work towards something. But it's not the same thing about trying to achieve a product. Sometimes it's a lot more about the process, or in fact, researching, exploring different possibilities. And sometimes it's also about collaborating with people in very, very different fields. So, you might be the kind of game designer, but there might be, museum curators, or there might be artists, or, things like that. So it's another revenue stream, which is quite interesting if you have that skill set or those sort of contacts.
And so, yeah, for sure, it's all seems to come down to trust, and you can only really engage on those once you've got an established catalog, right? Or some sorts of, hey, this is something that I've done. For sure, a lot of the work that I started getting was after I had made Yogi. And even though I could say, well, the LDEC Kitty Cataclysm, it's not earned me any money, and directly that is actually literally true, in that, financially, given the cost of going to all these places, but making that has definitely opened up doors for me. It's meant that people respect what I do. It's given me practice in making these games. The fact that I've made literally tens of games for the LDEC now means that if someone actually hired me to make a word game, I might yeah, I would have actually mixed feelings about that, given that I've made so many words. I'd want to make sure that it's something that you could not do with the L deck, if you know what I mean.
Yeah,
Somehow
you could draw on that experience. I think there's a way.
Yeah, that's my point. It's like you draw on all that design experience, but even like if someone asks me to make like any sorts of game, I'm going to draw on the experience of everything that I've made.
But it comes back to that. Yeah, you make a very good point that actually getting to this position to have that kind of portfolio, that experience, whether it's to get a grant or whether it's even to convince a publisher to buy your game, it's built on a lot of work that came before that you might not have made much money on, or that you were able to take on or to do because you didn't have to worry about making money for it, or that maybe you wouldn't have even done if money was the main concern. And so that's why, yeah, there's a certain amount of fortune or just good circumstance that can lead to being able to be a professional game designer, because I've been able to build up a portfolio of games over 10 years, that I've been able to do, not because I need to make money, but because I want to make games. And of course, now that I can transition into that being a more, a bigger concern of what I do, but I wouldn't have been able to do that without all this time where I didn't have to worry about it as much.
So we've kind of touched upon essentially the 3 ways that you can make money. Like, so you've got sending it to a publisher where first you get your advance, and then once your royalties have built up beyond that advance, sometimes you even get a signing bonus depending on the particular company. I mean, certainly I hear that Hasbro, they will give you some money just for the duration that they're looking at it, so they can afford to pay that money. But that's quite unusual. But you get that, you get the royalties, and sometimes you get paid for doing a particular thing, whether it's grants, whether it's a small company saying, hey, I would like you to come up with some ideas for a roll and write style game and just explore them and tell me what you come back with. And I think that the problem there was that maybe the deliverables are quite hard in some ways, at least for the first maybe 30 hours. It's quite hard for an outsider to see really what's going on so super clearly. And so if you want to then translate that into a form where someone else sees, okay, so this is what they're building up to, this is what they're leading to, that's going to almost take time away from the work that you are doing. And so, yeah, you have to kind of, you have to be good at communication for sure. And you have to be good at selling yourself. You have to be good at pitching to do these pitches. That's the case. And moving back to one question that came in from Alex, which was about collaborating and whether you feel like the split royalties do actually, yes, do you feel that splitting royalties is more than made up by the added productivity of working together?
Yeah, I definitely do. I think there's several parts to that. So, for those who don't know, obviously, if you design with multiple other designers on a game, you'll probably split the royalties evenly amongst all the designers. And most of my games are collaborations, and I firmly believe that, yeah, I will, at the very least, I think I would finish 2 games both with collaborators in the same amount of time, if not quicker, than a single game where I'm the only designer. So I think just from a numbers point of view, I think you end up ahead, because I think in most cases, you increase your efficiency more, by a higher factor than you do by, than in collaborating with people. I think there's other kind of aspects to that, I think, that are not as numerical. One is that I think I make better games in collaboration. So they're more likely to get sold, I think, and more likely to do well if they do get published. Although, of course, there are no guarantees in this, but this is like as a kind of average. And I think the only other thing is that so one of the ways that you, and we'll get onto this, but to make a living in game design, you need a game that will make you income for more than 1 year, essentially. Like most games will make all their money that they're ever going to make you in the year that they're published, or like within the first 3 to 6 months.
Yeah, sure. But most games, if you, as a percentage of everything that's released.
Yeah, exactly. So you need something that will keep making you money beyond the first year. And yes, a lot of it is like it's the type of game you make, but there's a certain amount of luck, and there's a certain amount of, you know, just being in the right place at the right time, having the right project, having whatever. And my view of it is that the more lottery tickets you can buy, the better the better your overall chance of doing well. Because, you know, 50% of a game that sells every year is way, way better than 100% of a game that only sells in 1 year. So I don't have any qualms about that. And it's not, you know, it's kind of like a calculated risk almost that you sort of go.
Do you not think that you can sort of, when you're making a game, do certain things to make sure that the game sells better? I know that Martin Wallace, I'm sorry it was after the show, but we were chatting about making money, and Martin doesn't want to come on until the clocks go back, because right now I think it's like 12 o'clock, like 12 midnight that I start. Anyway, it's pretty late for Martin in Australia. But anyway, the point is that while you're making a game, you can sort of, Martin says that they would choose to not make a game with a serious point to it. Like, they would not make a game that's talking about seize the power, like not make a game that's about negotiation and bigotry and discrimination and subjugation of power. Because Martin feels like, okay, people are wanting to play games for entertainment. Martin wants to make games that sell a lot. And for that reason, we've got to think about what sells. Do you not think that you can sort of do certain things to make sure that your games become evergreens?
Yeah, I mean, no, you're definitely right. There are certain things that you can do to improve your chances that the game will sell well. There are obviously some themes which are difficult to sell. I think as a designer, you have a little less control over that. Ultimately, you know, there are a lot of things that go into how the game as a product appears, how it's advertised. I think as Michael's kind of right, is that there's like basically you're doing all that you can to improve your chances, and to not do something that will mean that you can't sell the game. As a designer, usually that means if you do something that means the game can't be sold, then you won't sell it to anybody. Like it just won't get made. I'm sort of talking about, I guess, that, you know, assuming that you're at the point that you're making a game that is
as good as you can make it.
Yeah,
but and then having said that, as good as you can make it is a weird thing, because you could always do another 100 playtests. You could always like reach out to more people and reach out to a whole new audience and say, okay, well, this is a really silly, ridiculous game, and maybe I don't care about how gamers are dealing with yoga, but maybe I want to go to some more bars. I could have kept on going to bars, you know, ad infinitum, and kept on testing that.
Yeah.
At what point is it enough?
Alex is right. You know, perfect's the enemy of done, and I think there's just diminishing returns. I think you definitely know that there's a point where you're not going to make it that much better. And I would say that what the publisher will do to that game in terms of all these other things like art, illustration, graphic design, advertising, production quality, that will have so much of that. It'll have a order of magnitude larger effect on how the game does than that. I think that extra 5% development. Obviously, in all we say, there's always a bit of exceptions, but I think ultimately you're just trying to get the best chance to make the best game. And I'd say, as long as when you get to a point where you're making those games that publishers want to make, then if you're just able to make a few more of them, you're giving yourself a better chance to be lucky, I think, or to have a game that is that whirlwind of, you know, like you look at any game that like look at Wingspan, for example, you know, fantastic game, you know, very smooth, beautiful art, everything. But there's nothing to say that, you know, it gets released 3 years before that, and for whatever reason, it just doesn't catch, you know, into something of the consciousness. And that has nothing to do, I think, about the inherent quality of the design or even the production. You know, there are these intangible things that you can't predict. So having a few more lottery tickets, I think, is
I mean, for sure. I mean, self-publishing has made me realize the harsh truth that the success of a game is largely about it's largely about how the publisher handles it, I think. I mean, sure, the game itself has to be good to some extent. it has to have some elements of, okay, this is something that isn't generally being done all the time. If you just made a reskin of Snakes and Ladders and managed to get it to sell more than a few thousand copies, it's like, okay, we really need to do a case study of this, and I will have you on, like, let's find out. But having said that, like, Snakes and Ladders continues to sell well. Like, I just shot myself in the foot with that statement.
Well,
but you know what?
It's
like, if you had like a designer game, like a game that you managed to sell for royalties, that was, you know, something like that. And look, my point is that there's certainly an element to the quality of the game, but it's mainly due to the marketing, I believe. It's mainly due to the luck. It's mainly due to the, as you say, like, does this magazine cover it? Does this other magazine cover it? Does this news channel cover it? Does it go into this other big stream media? And
well, you touch on it, and I was going to talk about this a little bit. I think, however, there are certain types of games. I think as a designer, you can be cognizant of trends in the industry. You can be cognizant of certain styles of games that are popular. And I think it can be a way to, you can target parts of the market that you think aren't being served, but you can see that there's an audience for. I think you can take away a bit of that luck necessarily. And I think in some ways, yes, you can actually target a particular segment of the market. It requires you to work with a publisher who's going to do that as well. You can't do it by yourself. But I think with one of my current things, and I'd say the type of game that is going to enable me realistically to be a professional game designer, at least at this point and in the next X number of years, are narrative games. So I have the adventure games with Cosmos. They've just released the 4th box in German this year. And the difference between narrative games and, I guess, traditional hobby games is that they're serialized. You release new products which are not expansions regularly. You know, and I once read a really interesting point about the games, and not just tabletop games, but games generally, were becoming much more like a subscription model, where this idea is that you're paying it's like Fantasy Flight basically does with LCGs. You pay $10 every month and you get. But even outside of that, if you think of like Exit, if you like Exit, you're going to pretty much buy every Exit box they ever release. You know, almost.
If you like it's enough.
Yeah, and yeah, if you like it, if that's what you like, but it's because the publisher is making a product that is regular and is consistent, so that it builds up a loyal audience who trust that product, will always buy the next one. And the very nature of narrative and escape room games is that you always want to try the next one because it's going to be new. It's, it doesn't, you buying the previous ones doesn't impinge on your ability necessarily to enjoy the later ones. And that phenomenon actually does open up a slightly different model to be a professional game designer, because it takes away a little bit of this problem with releasing games where, you release a game and it'll sell most of its copies immediately when it's released. And if it doesn't do well enough in that first release, there won't be another print run. There's no point in making an expansion, because an expansion is only, a certain percentage of the base game sales. So if the base game sales already aren't too well, an expansion won't do better either. But scenario-based or like escape room or narrative games are a different way, because you can release a new product, because it's likely to have a higher percentage of the people who played the first box will buy the second one, because it's not impinging on their enjoyment. People can just buy the second box. There's no requirement. And even more than that, if people like the second box, then they go back and they're like, oh wow, there were like 5 other of these that I can now, it drives the sale of the older products as well. It's this really good synergy. And you see that with the Exit games. We see that with the adventure games, that the newer games sell well, but it's crazy. It's the original ones that still in new sales do just as well, if not better than they did in their first year. And that's
maybe it's because people, when they go back, they want to try number one. And even if you don't need to start from number one, you kind of feel like, well, there's something nice about starting with the first one and then working my way through. Yeah,
exactly. I think, and there's sort of like a completionist thing. And I think, even outside of that, there's a lot of people that, people want to start at the beginning, and often people stocking the games, they'll go, oh, like, what's the start of the series? Okay, I'll try 2 of them. That's going to be the first 2 probably. But it's I suspected it before I had a game like that, but now that I'm on the other side and I see kind of the sales and how that works, and just the fact that it builds and builds on itself. You know, the hardest thing about a designer is not that a game is good or bad, because I truly believe that most games, even if you played a game, you just discovered it and it was released 5 years ago, it's, you know, there's as much a chance that you will enjoy it as a game that's released now. The problem is that it's very hard to keep those games in the public eye for 5 years if they're not selling. But if you have a game that you can keep in the public eye for that amount of time, as these, you know, scenario-based narrative games do, that shows just how much those communities can build and build on them, essentially. And so, you know, the adventure games is one. I have two other. There'll be another game series launching next year with another publisher, which I can't really talk about, but it is a narrative game, and it will have 3 scenarios in the first release, and they're already asking us to do another 3 for the next year. I'm about, actually, directly after this stream, we're meeting to talk about the 6th adventure game that we're working on, and there's yet another narrative game that I hope will be released either next year or the next year.
Yeah, I'm hearing the same. Like, he wants to start working on some sort of franchise, and like that's the nice thing about smaller games, that there can be an awful lots of them, that it really builds up. I mean, for sure, I know at least one person who bought Yogi Guru and never bought Yogi, and that I did make certain design choices to make sure that Yogi Guru can be played on its own, but it's not intended to be played on its own. It's really, okay, if you play it on its own, it will be a bit worse than the original, in my opinion. But if you mix them together, that is like the ultimate experience, because it's like, okay, you've got lower body stuff, you've got all the wild cards, and that kind of just really ramps it up to the craziest limit. But maybe you want a few of the slightly simpler cards mixed in there as well. And for sure, if I were to go back now, knowing that there was going to be an expert edition, and I would move some of the cards, and hindsight to, anyway.
Yeah, but, I mean, yeah, this idea of having a franchise, and it's not just, it doesn't have to be just scenario games. Plan B does this very well. You look at the Century Spice Road series, you know, that you're building on. It's all about building an audience who will trust your products and will come back to that. As a designer, you can do that. I think of someone like Bruno Cathala, I think is very, very good at having a, I don't know if he would call it this, but having a brand. You know, people know Bruno Cathala, they see his name on the box and they'll buy the game. That's another way that you get around this kind of, you know, the foibles of the market. You know, if you have a strong brand, and if people like your games, they tend to like more of your games, and so they're more likely to buy them.
I mean, do you not think that everyone kind of goes to that point, towards that some point? Because like Dave Turksey, there's like at least one person in here who will seek out Dave Turksey games. And I imagine that there's at least a couple of people in the world who would be interested to know what Bez is working on next, and at least a couple of people who would be interested to know what Matthew Dunstan is working on next. You know what I mean?
But it depends how consistent those games are and how if they're hitting the same audience. So this is something I don't do very well. I like making games that appeal to like a fairly broad range of audiences. So, you know, there's not as much of a correlation if you like one of my games that you're going to like another one of my games. David's much better in that, you know, David Turksey games are, I would say, in a narrower range in terms of like the audiences that will like those games. Maybe Martin, I'd say, you know, Martin Wallace is probably similar. I like Vlada Shartel is another good example of someone I think who makes a really wide range of games. Like if you look at like Mage Knight, the board game, versus Codenames, you know,
or even going simpler than Codenames, Good Question, or crazier, Bunny Bunny Moose Moose.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So there's a huge, he publishes a huge range of different games, and yeah, as Manuel says, you can't guess what he's working on next, and those audiences don't necessarily overlap. So, I mean, you know, all these things we're talking about, they're all like different parts of the puzzle, and you don't have to do all of them. But also the point about branding, though, is it's not just about the games you release. It's self-promotion. It's exactly what you were talking about earlier. It's not just pitching your games to publishers. It's selling yourself. How do you become, you know, how do you take over some of that promotion of games? How do you, you know, because you can rely on the publishers to do it. But if you are also yourself cultivating some audience who knows you that you can talk about your games to, then that's also supporting whatever the work the publisher might do. And Bruno's very good about that. You see him out everywhere. He's very active on Facebook, very big in the French community, for example.
Now, talking about building up yourself as a professional person, like you mentioned before we started, Rob Davio's video, and rather than starting to repeat all the things that Rob Davio's talks about, because we don't have a lot of time left, like 40 minutes, it seems like a lot, but it goes away quickly. Like it feels like might want to just say, yes, that is a video worth watching if you want to know how to act in a professional manner. But what are the key points of being a professional person? I mean, I guess meeting your promises that you say, if you are letting someone know if you're going to be late, if you're having health problems, you can be late, but like let people know at the earliest opportunity. I mean, I made a couple of emails today in the last week to say, hey, look, I'm having some health problems. Well, first email was, hey, due to lockdown and stuff, I'm not going to be able to do this as quickly as I thought. And then second was, hey, you know what, due to excruciating dental pain, I'm not sure when I can come back to this work, but I will get to it, but I'll keep you informed. And, I guess that's part of it, just keeping people informed. What else would you add to that?
Yeah, I think it's not just about being a game designer. I think in any job or any profession, having, being trustworthy, responsible, and just having good communication. I think good communication will get you through most problems as a game designer, realistically. Most problems usually stem from some misunderstanding, some miscommunication, or, having bad impressions is a lot to do with how you communicate with publishers, or how you communicate in a first impression kind of setting. So I think ultimately, if you just focus on treating people with respect and thinking about how you're developing that as a relationship that's not built just on extracting value from each other, and that you respect the other person, and that you're sort of, just all these kind of basic things that you would tell anybody to do in any kind of professional setting, I think just make as much sense and are as important as a game designer. So yeah, and being and there is a bit of, on top of that, there are certain skills that as a game designer you don't necessarily have, like project management is not something that you necessarily would be good at, but you could still be a very good game designer. And thankfully, I think from my scientific background, I'm very used to juggling lots of projects at the same time at different stages. And, if you want to be a professional game designer, you have to be able to do that. You're going to have projects in lots of different stages because you want to have lots of games going on. But actually balancing all of that and making sure that you're not letting people down, communicating with publishers if you've got some problems or clashes or whatever, that's really important. And balancing your time and time management, all these kind of, self-help kind of things. It's not, game design is not immune to that. Ultimately, the people who are doing this professionally, they have similar skill sets to anybody else who's able to do something professionally. They have to have responsibility. They have to have good time management. They have to have good communication.
I mean, this is a thing that I'm doing this show, and the more and more, like, people say, oh, aren't you going to run out of topics? I'm realizing that, there are so many topics. There's, like, obviously all the intricacies of game design. Like, we could talk about in Isaac Shalev and Jeff Engelstein's book, any of those mechanisms, we could devote an entire show to them. I think it would be almost trivial to spend an entire hour talking about, like, worker placement, like, all the good example, blah, blah, blah. But, obviously, as you say, it's also about the way you conduct yourself as a professional, that time management, that communication, all these things, and trying to have that work-life balance, which I touched upon with Calvin Wong, but Saloon. But also, yeah, there's so much to it. Sounds like also, like, does more and more ethical concerns, do you think that matters at all? I mean, as a human, I think it absolutely matters. But in terms of making money, do you think it matters if you are an ethical, good person? Do you know what I mean? Like, that's an extreme example. There was obviously, if you are someone who is abusing people, you will get ejected from the industry, and there was an example of this last year. But
I think, I mean, yes, you're going to be judged on any aspect of your character, you know, whether that's right or not. I think a slightly less kind of, you know, extreme case, obviously, yeah, if you're breaking the law and doing anything like that, you deservedly should not be part of this industry.
That's not just about breaking the law. That's about...
you know, I think, yeah, there's an agreement, hopefully, on, you know, behavior that's not acceptable, essentially. But at a less extreme point, you know, publishers do talk to each other a lot. And I think you would much prefer to have a reputation as someone that is easy to work with and that people like working with. Now, that can be in many different ways. You might, you know, people might just like working with you because you're very on time. And, you know, it's not necessarily always about how personable you are or whether you know, have the same humor or whatever. If you're just responsible and punctual, that is often enough. But yeah, that, you know, being known as somebody who's easy to work with and, you know, deliver on time, that does help a lot. It's hard to necessarily exactly quantify that, but, you know, you might get an opportunity to work on a game, or a publisher might approach you to work on a game or something like that. You know, just because they know that you're fine to work with, or they've enjoyed meeting you for several years. So it, you know, just don't, you know, as Will Wheaton says, don't be a dick, you know, essentially. It's, yeah.
You talked about like stuff in your personal life impacting it. Do you think that like personal beliefs, like let's say religious or political beliefs, I mean, as long as you aren't a jerk to other people, like let's say you are a sex worker as a sideline, do you think that would impact your ability to work on children's games?
I mean, that's an interesting hypothetical situation. I don't know. I think it would have to be how you're setting up that relationship with a publisher or whoever you're working with. You know, ultimately the success of whatever project is going to be determined on how well, you know, two or more people fit together. And yes, I think you've touched on, there are many different things that can feed into that relationship, such as, you know, what you do for a job or how you act, but like, it's all going to depend on that specific relationship. And I don't think I would say that, you know, a particular occupation should preclude somebody from working on a particular game. It's going to depend on, again, finding that partnership that makes sense, and the context that, you know, of the types of games and audience and all these other things. So,
but for sure, you need to avoid some sorts of bleeds. Like if you're on Twitter for one thing, maybe you can't. I mean, and a quick hello to Paul. It's lovely to see you. Don't need to apologize. You're welcome whenever you join. And bye, Michael. It is lovely like, I mean, maybe I'm kind of delving too far outside of the topic, but, you know, this first trap board games, that was like, okay, like at what point do you kind of, is it okay, that's maybe something that might impact the way a publisher looks at you, the way that, because it might be okay, that person's a bit, like all of the photos that I saw were very tastefully done, and there wasn't anything that was that risque. But let's say that someone, you know, like, let's say someone was a bit more, okay, I'm going to do more of a boudoir shot with me in lingerie. And, you know, like, do you think that would affect the way that publishers kind of view or are willing to work with that person?
Yeah, I think it could, rightly or wrongly. I mean, Rob Davio says something, I think says it better in his video, that it's ultimately your personal choice. I think, you know, I think firstly is to be aware that obviously anything you put out on the internet, social media, etc., that is going to be considered part of your persona, your identity, rightly or wrongly. And you have to accept that publishers and audiences and gamers and, you know, are going to make decisions and make assumptions, rightly or wrongly, based on what they're consuming. So, you know, and I think it's up to each individual to make their own personal choice about like what they're comfortable sharing, and also what they're comfortable in terms of what, you know, how people might react. There is, of course, an aspect that you can't control how people are going to react to anything they find. So yeah, I mean, and Paul talks about having, personal versus company kind of profiles and things like that. I mean, I've never been. I just have one Twitter account. I have one account on everything. But yeah, I think I'm not somebody generally who. I think even if I wasn't a game designer, I don't think I'm that interested in being very provocative in a kind of like the kind of internet sphere, if that makes sense. Like I would have those conversations privately. But it's even like less kind of provocative things. Like, for example, I don't like I would never really talk about games. I would like never do game reviews or even short kind of. I think I would talk about games that I'm interested in, or if I think of them in a kind of design aspect, I'd sort of dissect them or talk about what choices they make. But I think there's I understand just how hard it is to publish. We both of us do understand to design a game and then to have it kind of like ripped to shreds in the public domain. I don't want to do that to somebody else. But also, there is an aspect of I don't want that to be part of my brand. Like I think that if I want to have a conversation about a game I don't understand, I'd like to talk to the designer about it. I'd like to have a conversation and learn something about it. I don't want to just go on Twitter and go like, this thing's unbalanced. That doesn't. It not only doesn't make not from a branding point of view. I don't think it makes sense from if I'm going to learn anything or.
But from a I've started doing these short reviews that I'm getting Chris to kind of cut up, that I will probably put on Board Game Geek, because it's like, a kind of off the cuff thing every Sunday, and I'm just like, okay, I'm going to go through my collection before I get rid of 90% of them. And yeah, and it's like kind of a way to say goodbye to these games. And I would like, since I've done that, I would like it to be up on the internet. I have thought lots about this, because if I'm negative about someone's game, then that can give the impression that I'm difficult to work with. On the other hand, if I kind of give reasons for things, it seems appropriate. Like if I take the time to sort of say, I mean, this is a specific card that I have questions about, or hey, in this game, at least for this time, it felt like my success was all down to this one card, and my victory felt cheap. That's me reporting on my... And isn't that kind of interesting, like hearing it? I would be interested to hear... In a way, it would be nice if more designers were free to chat about things. Like, talking about branding, like, you are so right that, yeah, no one knows people really here. And Rob Harper mentioned it earlier. We're not like musicians or like book authors. No one who knows who Leslie Scott is, even though like Jenga, it sold reasonably well. And then, and I have had like a couple of French people contact me for interviews, which kind of, when they find out that my French is quite terrible, I think they kind of get a little bit disappointed. At least two of them stopped talking to me pretty much. Although it was COVID and stuff, but I think it might have just been that they were busy or whatever. But anyway, look, should we actually talk about our own personal journeys and share as much as we personally would be willing to share, and what we ascribe our personal paths and successes to? Because my personal journey is a lot simpler. Basically, it's all thanks to one game that I'm making an income as a designer. And honestly, Yogi, they are selling a good quantity, in that once I go to Thailand, I'm not going to have any financial worries at all. I could, as long as it continues selling at the rate that it is, and 17, 18, 19, 20, it's been selling a decent amount for 4 years. At this point, Gigamix fairly confident it's going to become an evergreen. So going back a step, I did self-publish it to start off with. I made in a bind, and by self-publishing it, I think that going through those reviewers and everything, it gave me extra input. I made a bunch of changes. I was happy with what I made. And then it's all thanks to Dave Cousins, who I think you also know. Dave Cousins showed it to Gigamic, as well as a couple of companies that don't need to be mentioned. And yeah, then Gigamic offered me the best, most appealing contract. They made a big, they guaranteed that they are going to sell a large number per year. And basically, if they don't sell, you know, a 5-digit number per year, then I could ask for the rights of the game back to share it with another company. I mean, if they are selling, you know, slightly less than that, you know, it should be like a judgment call for me. At what point am I like, well, this is a blip, maybe there's been a pandemic. If, you know, you sell 1,000 less than you were meant to sell, well, I'll forgive you. I'm not going to take the rights back. But, you know, realistically, if it started selling less than that, it's in their interest to continue promoting it. And they have done a great job. And that is what I owe it all to, that Gigamic do have these connections. They are promoting it in magazines. They're promoting it in many shops around France. And they've got those partnerships that it's now in 20+ languages. I've honestly lost count. But I've got like lots of copies over there that are going to stay at my parents' house because, you know, it's a real source of pride that I've made this one thing that's done, I'm going to almost incredibly well. I mean, I can believe it, so it's not literally incredible, but it is almost incredibly well. And then basically it is thanks to that one thing. And I don't know if anyone has any questions based on that, but if you do, you can ask and I will answer. But Matthew, what would you like to share about your story?
Well, I think the other thing I'd say is that it's you make it sound simple, but obviously there's many years of went into work even before you sold the game to Gigamic as well.
Like before I self-published it, there was like 2 years of like design, and like kind of there were years of designing other games, and then there were years of listening to Mark Rosewater. A lot of the stuff that I know I owe to Who What Why. That's a brilliant podcast. I owe to Ludology. That's a brilliant podcast. I owe to Mark Rosewater and everything they write, because 90% of it is specific to Magic the Gathering, but 10% of it is invaluable for any board game designer. I keep sharing like that one video, 20 years, 20 lessons. That's an amazing video. If you have been watching this and you've not watched that, definitely watch that at the end of this if you have time, or watch it tomorrow, tonight, whenever. But yeah, for sure, all that learning and the iterating and trying things, and also all the people who helped me, like Rob, Harris, who kind of set up Playtest UK. And I don't know if you played in a bind back in the day.
I did, yeah.
But like, I have strong memories of when it was at its peak craziness, when people were literally jumping around the table. So you had to hop around the table, and then you had to do sit-ups whilst cards were still balanced on you. And then I wound it back a little bit.
No, I remember the days when you were developing into that. I just Alan in chat asked about Dave Cousins. Dave Cousins is another game designer based in the UK, and he's a friend of both sides, has contacts with publishers, and I suspect he offered to show it in, you know, just as a friend, you know, showing it on your behalf because he knew.
For the full story behind that, oh gosh, let me try and be really succinct. Dave Cousins is a friend. We were going to share a booth at Spiel. I was unable to go to Germany. Dave was selling my games on my behalf. I basically said, you know what, I can't make it. You've got some of my games in the back of your thing. How about we do 40, like 60? I think I suggested something like that. It's like, you keep 40% of the money, I keep 60% of the money. And so it, like, if you sell stuff, I would really appreciate it. And yeah, Dave Cousins sold like hundreds of copies, which is quite good for a brand new game that basically has no press, because it's a really easy thing to sell. And I think that's the reason why it succeeded, is because it is super simple. And if I may say so, I believe that it is well designed and developed, insofar as all the cards are fairly unassuming. There are simple things to do. Touch your nose with a finger. There's no single card on there that should be challenging to anyone within the target audience. But difficulty ramps up, it quickly becomes hilarious. So yeah, I guess it's about having brilliant, helpful friends. And yeah, everything is thanks to the other people around you.
No, it's the same for my story. You know, that it obviously, you know, my game design journey is a lot owed to Brett Gilbert, who I met very early on, and we started a playtesting group together. People like Rob Harris with the Playtest UK network, and people like Alan Hall, who gave us names of contacts of people we could meet at publishers at Essen. So yeah, it's very much built on a lot of kindness and just a lot of generosity from other people, offering information or support or playtesting, for free. I mean, in terms of the journey towards a professional game designer, yeah, I don't have the same sort of story. I don't really have an evergreen title, although the adventure games, as I was sort of talking about, are becoming that slowly in a sort of a different way. For me, I was releasing a lot of games. I mean, my first game was published in 2013 with Days of Wonder, Relic Runners, so that was quite unexpected, and for someone's first game, sold reasonably well, but it didn't sort of, as I was sort of talking about, most of the games I've released sold the most in the first year and very, very little after that. In some ways, I made up for that by making a lot of games. Obviously, you don't control schedules so much, so they're kind of like and that's the point about trying to make the decision to go professional. Before this time, there wasn't that kind of regular expectation of things, because you don't necessarily need an evergreen, but if you don't have an evergreen, you need to have at least 4 or 5 games releasing every year, realistically. Interestingly enough, probably from that would have started happening this year. I had 1 or 2 years where I had 4 or 5 games. COVID obviously has messed everything up, but on the list of games, I think there's about 20 games which are signed and to be released in the next few years for myself. And I think it was that kind of future of releases, even understanding that the vast majority of those games are going to sell a bit and then disappear. But that combined with 1 or 2 games, which like the adventure game series, the other one is Monumental, which is probably the largest game ever designed, also a solo design, which we were talking a little bit about, like the split in royalties. And while I strongly believe that it's good to collaborate, when you do have a game that's a solo design that does well, then yeah, obviously you make a little bit more money from it. And the other thing about Monumental is that it's a Kickstarter game, and it's another style of game that you can target, and certainly publishers do target. Our game, these large miniature games that do well on Kickstarter, and also now the environment has come that's very normal, is that you'll essentially kickstart every print run and every expansion. And it allows you to not only, sell the new thing, but also resell the old thing. A little bit like I was talking about with the adventure games. And actually that ecosystem, I mean, who knows how long it's going to survive. And it definitely is harder and harder to be on Kickstarter. But if you are with an established publisher or, that has a track record or whatever, it can provide, again, something that's like an evergreen. It's not an evergreen, but it can provide regular releases that are of a magnitude that, you can start thinking about being professional enough. And we kickstarted the first, well, it's actually the second expansion, but the second campaign was just this year. It didn't do quite as well as the first campaign, but it still did very well. We did about, I don't know, probably like half a million euros, something like that. And it looks like that we'll be able to keep doing that. I'm working on another expansion. There might be another, that might be a line of other games as well. So, once you start having a few of these, kind of lines or series going, then that also gives you kind of more regular work, even outside of one big hit. As I said, we're working on the next adventure game where, there's a good expectation that there'll be 1 or 2 of those every year. And I hope they'll keep doing well. Hopefully, there's good signs that they will. So, and, with this idea of the passive income, and the same with having an evergreen, it does, once there's sort of like a tipping point. And once you get over that tipping point, in some ways it gets easier, because you actually have more time to work in some ways on new projects, or to take bigger risks, or to work harder on a particular project to give it the best chance, while at the same time having the kind of security from these other releases. So yeah, but yeah, I think that the thing to be certain about in that is that, yeah, this is after 10 years of
and that's kind of a big part of the power of expansions and everything. And whilst I know that there was a question on BigTalk, someone saying, hey, why do people buy expansions? I would rather buy a brand new game rather than something that costs pretty much the same amounts of money. And I can totally understand that. Some people saying, well, sadly, it's down to the money. And, you know, so much is down to the money. Like, frankly, whether a game gets released or not, in the first instance, is down to the money. So, yes, it is down to the money. It is financially motivated, but that doesn't make it bad. Because step 0 is, you know, making sure that you have a game worth playing. I mean, we've not really talked about so much, like, not talking about gimmicks, but having sure that there is some aspects of your game that is a talking point, making sure that there's some aspects of your game that is a story afterwards that people can say, oh my gosh, did you remember when this happened? Like, I keep thinking, this isn't just me and bringing it up because it's my game, but genuinely, like, there was one game with, back when Yogi was in a bind and with the wild cards, so, there was someone called Tim, and for every single card where there was a question mark, people shouted Tim. So it's one finger touching Tim, one hand above Tim, and do you know Andy Hopwood?
Yeah.
And they were in that game, and so like there was all these people in Birmingham basically crowding around Tim, and Tim was kind of trying not to laugh, and it was the most ridiculous thing brought on by the creativity and all these wild cards. And I feel like those kinds of things, I would love to hear those wildcards allow people to do stories, but also within a strategic game, you've got those standout moments. Like maybe when the fact that My Little Scythe allows you to jump from 2 achievements to 4 achievements in the final turn, but only in that one final turn can you really jump up. The fact that in a Ticket to Ride game, you reveal those tickets and it's, oh my gosh, do you remember that one game where I got too greedy and I basically did 1 out of my tickets and I ended up getting like -10 for everything because I was just... and like, or that one game that I've actually written down in the cover of the box where and games should share stories. And so step 0 almost is making a game that it's going to attract people, making a game that it is easy to advertise, making a game that it has the possibility of some table presence. Like thinking about that, maybe thinking about your game as products, frankly, putting it in the context of how expensive is this to make, how expensive will this be to buy, and is it worth it? But I want to start wrapping up around this point. Do you have any quick things to inject?
No, I think, you're touching on a lot of different things that go into crafting games that are not only great to play, but also sell well. And those are the things you sort of pick up, I think, over time. And I think one thing I'm quite good at is having a very diverse range of ideas. And I think different ideas can fit different requirements. Some suit a gimmick, or some really suit, telling different stories. Some suit a really product angle of thinking about how to design them, and having that diversity, I think, can help and lets me target things. There was an interesting question from Alex about, do you have to make good games to make a living as a designer? No. I mean, firstly, the term good games is, it means anything to anybody, right? Like that it's a subjective thing, but no, because I think things that sell are not synonymous to, like, a lot of the games that Hasbro makes, these, various poo and, themed, whether you think of them as games or they're certainly games, and, but the people who design them, I'm sure they're doing quite well. So my point is that, there's a lot of things that go into something being successful that have nothing to do with the design. Of course, we're in the kind of hobby game part of the market where I think design...
I feel like there can be a bit of hoity-toity, what is a game in... Look, I'm not going to say that I would choose to play these games. There's a lot of games that sell well that I think have big issues. And I think that a lot of the reasons that Monopoly continues to sell well is, at this point, inertia. I think that inertia is a strong reason, but at the point where it started selling, you know, there were certain really, really good things about the design. I think that, honestly, if you look at Monopoly in the context of when it was starting to be released and say that is not a good game, I mean, yeah, I would honestly really argue that point, because for like the 1930s, 1940s, I would say that is absolutely in the upper echelon of what board games were.
Sure, but anyway, I mean, the good game argument is kind of a black hole anyway. Like, you can just disappear into that and just sort of, you know, like what?
Yeah, let's not talk about that when we've got like to wrap up. I mean, I would say there has to be some quality about the game that makes it sell well, and you have to be cognizant of.
That doesn't have to be the design necessarily. That can be the product. It can be some aesthetic about the product that is the thing that's going to sell the game. The design has to support that, but it doesn't have to be the standout thing that's going to make the game sell and sell really well.
I mean, I almost feel like I should, you know, like all my old shows, that's the board games with Bez, I'm going to start releasing them on like an actual podcast so that people can download them, not just on Mixcloud. And that what is a game, what is a good game, maybe we could open that up to a group discussion and just spend a couple of hours chatting about, yeah, what is a good game.
Maybe,
and not really learning anything, but having a good answer. Do you know what I mean?
Exactly, yeah. But my experience with the discussion, like, is that, yeah, nothing much is learned, and it's just circular. Like, ultimately, I don't know. I don't know how you.
I enjoy sometimes a circular discussion just for the sake of being around people.
Yeah, exactly.
And that would be fun. But listen, let's. How can we develop business opportunities to maintain regular income? I think that for sure we've established that a lot of it is luck, but a lot of it is kindness and getting to know people, and frankly listening to things like this and watching things like this. But also, actually, Matthew had a really good tweet which was saying, hey, if you're paying money to go on a design course, maybe think about actually just doing the design. You don't want to just, if you do the course and then you do work alongside it, if it's like giving you a, then maybe that's great. Maybe it's the thing that motivates you to do things. And I don't want to say people shouldn't be asking for courses, because for sure there is a lot of skill that goes into teaching someone how to design. But it comes down to ultimately you trying to design and then you iterating and then you learning from it and then you making things better. Any more about this? How can we develop?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's the business opportunities. Yeah, it's about it's about relationships at the end of the day. You know, that's. If you're not looking to publish your own games, you need to get someone else who's going to publish them, and that's all about making a relationship with that publisher. So that's something to realize how important that is. And the other point to say up to this point is that it is actually, you know, I've definitely been in a very privileged position to be able to do that. I have the means to be able to go to shows, to go to multiple shows over many years, to forge those relationships, and not everyone has access to that.
And I've been privileged in that I don't have any dependents. I have the time. I had the luxury of time. Yeah, that was a big thing for me.
Yeah, and so
there's a welfare system here that I was able.
And hopefully, you know, the with COVID things have moved a little bit more virtual, and maybe there's a little bit more accessibility there. But you know, it's understanding that, you know, it's a combination of your own circumstances and you know, the opportunity you get. So it's one of those hard things to say that there's some rule book that you can follow it and get there. But I think your point about it's getting connected with the community. I think the great thing about the board game community and the board game design community, it's generally very friendly and very generous, I think. And you know, if you're starting out or trying to become professional, then and hopefully there's a lot of people you can talk to that might make that easier or give you some ideas.
And you talked about earlier on how it's all about trust, about communication, about all those things. And do we need an evergreen title? Well, you need something that is going to continue selling beyond that first year in some manner in order to actually make any revenue from it. However that is done. So yes, in some ways, I mean, can we agree that you do need an evergreen title to actually make this into a full-time job?
Yeah, but I think the definition of evergreen is changing. I think with these kind of more serialized kind of games, that has changed what an evergreen is. I think it's also harder to have evergreens. You know, I think, and Rob Novier made this point, I think that it's hard, like fewer and fewer percentage of games are reaching that kind of stage now. But at the same time, there are still a lot of opportunities. There are more opportunities to make games. So if you can make a lot of games, you actually have more opportunities to release more games. So it's a mix. It's hard to say.
Really quickly, addressing Alan's points earlier that there's so many games, Alan didn't think those would be making money, but yes, most of them don't make money, and that's a point. That's a tiny fraction. So if you go into this thinking, oh, well, it's likely that I'll make money, no, it's unlikely that you'll make money unless there's something, you know, super awesome about you. And let's be honest, we all hope that there is something super awesome about us, but let's be realistic to some degree, and let's think, okay, what can I do really well, and do I have the time to learn these things? Anyway, going back to the recap, we talked about puzzles, about Thief, about Sunshine, about tiny houses, about the Spiel des Jahres buffet, which was apparently very good quality but unmemorable. And we talked about Eurovision. We talked about grants, about trust, about advances, about royalties. We talked about collaborations. We talked about trends, about how to advertise yourself, about sex work, and very briefly, we talked about franchises. We talked about time management and ego and communication, about kindness and generosity, about evergreen things, about, you know, and there's so much more that we could explore, being professional or brand recognition, or, you know, the making games that sell well and thinking about them as products and what is a good game, and about all the privilege that goes into it. And so if you want to hear more from, whoops, I should have done that on also. If you want to check more from Matt, then check out all those links. And if you want to check me out, stuffbybez.com, stuffbybez.bigcards.com. You can still buy print and play versions of Kitty Cataclysm or the LDEC. Twitter.com/stuffbybez, Instagram.com/stuffbybez, Twitch.tv/stuffbybez. I stream every day at 10 AM UK time and 8 PM on Tuesdays is kind of a let's play things together. YouTube.com/c/stuffbybez for all the old episodes, and stuffbybez.com/discord if you want to join to chat more about this, suggest topics, suggest guests, or ask questions or share pictures of a cat, because I have a cat chat. So please go in and share pictures of cats. And that is me wrapped up. Thank you, everyone. You have all been amazing. Thank you, Matthew. You have been wonderful. We've got about 1 minute to ask. Over to you. What are you up to? You can share anything you want to. Let's start with you, Matthew.
I am about to go to another meeting to talk about the adventure games, actually. So
that is what you want to share. And anyone who wants to share anything?
I just sort of shout out to Henry, who's been doing is an amazing designer of parks from Keymaster Games and other things, but also has been doing amazing game design tweets at the moment. So check out Henry's Twitter feed, because he has amazingly illustrated game ideas for free use. So check that out. I love what you're doing, Henry, by the way. Thank you.
Yeah, I checked out all those old things. That was super cool. For my next streams, I am going to be chatting tomorrow. It's all going to be about gender in design. So whether you're a designer or a publisher, I'm not going to say that we are the best people to talk about it, but I certainly feel like not enough people are talking about it. And yeah, so it's going to be myself with John Chambers, who's making a questionable game that we can talk about a little bit, as well as just Jane Sankey, Tally, and I feel like I'm forgetting someone. But check that out tomorrow. I'm going to be here every day. Check out my streams at stuffbybez.com/streams. Share, spread the word. I'm going to quickly look at seeing who we can raid. And Rob's got a virtual banquet this weekend. That sounds fun. Alex has to make a new version of their space adventure games and have been putting it off. Oh, I'm sorry to hear that. And thank you for the lovely comments, everyone. It's been, and yeah, Henry, great work with those wee sketches. I've really found them like really interesting and made me think, oh, maybe I should do that. But you know, I'm kind of doing lots of stuff. Anyway, so let me quickly check Twitch so that I can see who else is streaming, just so I like to normally suggest. Oh, yeah, let's go to Idle Michael. If you want to hear more board game stuff, then Idol Michael is, I believe, working on a game just now, so we
just
will.
spam it with Eurovision stuff in the chat. I'm sure he'd be very happy.
So yes, if you go there, then please scream roar and put lots of love hearts or something when you get there. And for now, the only thing left to do is to say bye, 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 bye. This is a goodbye song. Bye, 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 bye. Thank you for watching along. Bye, 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 bye. This is the end of the show. Bye, 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 bye. And now it's time to go. Bye, 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 bye. This is a goodbye song. Bye, 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 bye. Thank you for watching along. Bye, 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 bye. This is the end of the show. Bye, 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 bye. And now it's time to go. Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye.